4.0 is around leveraging technology to become more efficient, to free up time to do more value-adding work. 5.0 is about putting the human back at the center of work. It doesn't mean we shouldn't leverage technology. Of course we should. But the challenge has been with the whole technology drive is that people have feared the evolution. They are scared to lose their job. They're concerned about how to stay relevant in the future. And they find little help to develop the skills that they need.
Hello, and welcome to Tech for Finance, where we help finance professionals leverage technology to level up their lives. I'm your host, Adam Shilton, and in this episode, we're speaking with Anders Liu Lindberg, partner and chief commercial officer at the Business Partnering Institute. He's also a LinkedIn Learning instructor and co-author of Create Value as a Finance Business Partner. After studying finance accounting at Copenhagen Business School, Anders has over 15 years of experience in finance and business roles. He has a passion for helping finance professionals evolve in a digital world through his work at the Business Partnering Institute, where he helps finance teams elevate their business influence. Anders is also an avid creator on LinkedIn, where he shares his thoughts on how the finance function is changing. And when he's not working, Anders likes to support his local soccer team and has been bowling for 30 years. But before we start, if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to Tech for Finance on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. But really appreciate you coming on, Anders. I've been wanting you on the show for ages and ages.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Adam. And I think it took me inviting you onto my show before I sort of made the move onto your show as well. But that's sometimes how it goes. And sometimes just about finding a slot in the calendar. And for good reasons, we're very busy at the Business Partnering Institute. So I was kind of postponing a little bit, but now we're here, and I'm also excited to be here, and really love the work that you are doing, which is on the tech side, and we do work on the people side. So combining those things creates something really powerful.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned on your podcast, Christian was your colleague, Christian Fans Hansen. He was one of the early podcast guests. He was very generous with his time. And that has been one of our top performing podcast episodes, like ever, how to create impact as a finance business partner. So it's really good. I'm hoping in this session today, because there's been a huge amount of buzz around tech and AI and all of that sort of stuff. And we'll touch on some of those topics. Obviously, it's what my listeners love, in terms of how to use tech better, emerging trends and all of those sorts of things. But I'm hoping today as well, we can cover some of the human side of things. And I know you're quite passionate about this, Anders. We quite quickly end up at a point where we become so invested in the tech, we sometimes forget what it is to be human. And I think that is going to be a fundamental question moving forward. So we can talk around that. But over to you. Quite interested because you've been speaking about the concept of, finance 5.0, CFO 5.0, and the human-centric finance function. So can you talk us a little bit through that? What the stages prior to 5.0 have been, just to set a little bit of context?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because when you ask people, and I'm taking a little step back here, I was under the conception that most people have heard about the term Industry 4.0, right? That we start to leverage technology and machines to really become a lot more efficient in our work processes. And of course, also in finance with lots of new tools coming in, the whole ERP wave a few decades back and all that. For me, that was kind of like the finance function 4.0, where we really leveled up through technology and really, had all sorts of digital finance transformation projects to streamline the finance function and try to free up time to maybe do some of the work that really matters. But even if in a crowd of relatively senior finance people, if I ask, have you heard about Industry 4.0? Very few has heard about it, and that's kind of surprising. And then, of course, when you start to talk about Industry 5.0, which is a really recently added perspective, not from me, right, but from the business side. Then, of course, people are like, okay, so I don't even know 4.0, and now you're talking about 5.0. And so when I launched the idea of Finance Function 5.0 back in springtime, of course, I'm sort of, speaking to an empty room of people that you feel that they have to catch up with the last 20, 30 years of of evolution, which is kind of strange. But that being said, if 4.0 is around leveraging technology to become more efficient, to free up time to do more value-adding work, 5.0 is about putting the human back at the center of work. It doesn't mean we shouldn't leverage technology. Of course we should. But the challenge has been with the whole technology drive is that people have feared the evolution. They are scared to lose their job. They're concerned about how to stay relevant in the future. And they find little help to develop the skills that they need. Because yes, of course, you can develop tech skills, and some people should definitely do that. But when no code, no code tools are coming into play, how much tech skills do you really need for the general finance professional? Not so much, right? You need to be a user of these tools, but anyone can use these tools nowadays, right? So it's more the human skills that are becoming critical. And that's the really challenging part for finance professionals. So when we have been pushing them towards, okay, you need to be a business partner, you need to be value adding, you need to develop relationship with non-finance professionals, you need to learn to communicate in new ways, they have been overwhelmed. And while I found it exciting, most people have found it daunting, exhausting, and it's leading more towards stress, burnout, and maybe even mental health issues. So this whole transformation paradigm that we've been working on for the past, I dare say, 20 years, it's not that it's wrong or that it has failed, but we need to add the human element to this. And we need to put the human, the finance professional, back in the center and say, okay, how do we create a workplace where you feel safe, supported to develop? Because if you don't develop, no matter what I do, it's going to be difficult to be relevant in the future. But you need to have the confidence and, let's say, psychological safety to step outside that comfort zone and start that development. So finance function 5.0 is about, creating a human-centric finance function that is running sustainably, both in the grandest definition of sustainability, but also from a human perspective. It's one that's resilient to change, because change, we can't stop the change, right? So we need to build that kind of resiliency. And then, of course, it's still one that is value adding. If you don't add value, then the robots will certainly take over. So I almost feel like, and I'm not a researcher, but I kind of feel like it's a PhD in the making for someone to research how do we put humans back at the center of work.
And thanks for that perspective. It's one that I wholeheartedly agree with. And from personal experience, as somebody who spends his time looking at the ones and the zeros, who's very deeply rooted in the whole world of digital AI, tech, all of that sort of stuff, you can end up feeling like a bit of a robot sometimes. And it's one of those where it's, inputs and outputs at the end of the day, right? If you're feeding yourself with endless screens, endless data, all of that sort of stuff, you are going to just think in terms of screens and data. So it's something that I personally am working on at the moment to try and add that perspective that, not necessarily emotional element, but, the kind of stuff that people can identify with rather than just the hard, this is a how-to, this is what it happens to be. And I think you're right. We're still in it, obviously, and we've gone to the next level with the advent of AI. So, it's more than digital transformation now, it's AI transformation. But it is quite fatiguing, as you say, if you are always trying to think about how to leverage tech to improve your performance as a finance professional, you are going to get burned out, So from your perspective, I mean, what's the minimum viable, I guess, entry point to know that, you don't need to worry about tech anymore and you can start focusing on some of this human stuff. So obviously data is fundamental, some sort of system. I mean, in your world, what do you see as a good baseline that people can then think, right, well, I can maybe forget about the tech piece now and I can just focus on building my influence, building on my people skills and becoming more of a human being?
I mean, of course, it depends on your seniority, right? I mean, if you are an entry level financial analyst, you probably will need to know how to use Power BI or similar tools, right? And while they are easier to use, perhaps than tools in the past, you still require a little bit of understanding of how these things work, right? So you do need to understand a bit of how does databases work and how can I put all these things together. You can also do a lot of things in Excel, but we also know that, the general level of Excel for people is not necessarily that high. My level of Excel is not that high. But then when I work with some really skilled modelers in FP&A, I can see the great things that they can build that makes things a lot easier and simpler. So I think if you're junior in your career, you need to know how to use the tools and how to use them well. And I think that becomes pretty natural to digital natives today, right? So they're used to using these tools. They might be saying, hey, develop Excel a bit more so it's easier, or develop Power BI a bit more so it's easier. And likes of Microsoft, of course, they continue to do that. So you need to know some. But if you're mid to senior level, you need to become what I call a techno. So not a techie, but a techno. So someone that knows what technology is available in general and how it can benefit your team or your finance function overall. You don't need to know how to implement it. You can find experts to do that. But of course, the experts will need to teach you how to use it, or teach the team how to use it. So that means instead of being tech savvy, you need to have let's call it broad tech horizon. So you need to, on a frequent basis, be scanning for, what's out there, what's the latest. I mean, listening to a podcast like this, or, go to events, go see what's there and talk to the experts. That's what you need to do if you're mid to senior level, keeping yourself informed about what's available and how it can benefit your function or your team. That's being a techno.
Great. I love that sort of stuff. Techno. Great. For me, actually, when you first said that, I immediately jumped to techno as in NO. And I think there's an interesting thought process there as well. Before we start the podcast, I was speaking to Anders about a book that I'm reading called The One Thing, which is, what's the one thing that I can do that makes all other activities easier, if not irrelevant, right? So when you said techno, that in my mind got me thinking, right, well, people have to have a high threshold for the technology they don't want to use, as well as the technology that they do want to use. And I think, and you can give this your perspective, Anders, but hundreds and hundreds of tools get released every day. And you sign up to one AI newsletter or one tech newsletter and you're absolutely bombarded, 5 top tools or whatever. And I'm guilty, my newsletter, I've got, three tools that I handpicked over the course of the week. But that's so people don't have to research themselves. But my recommendation is you always need to work back from what is actually going to bring value, right? So in my mind, I'd always have like at least a checklist or like a matrix of the key characteristics of the tech that I'd want to adopt alongside the goals that I want to achieve. And if they didn't fit that really high bar of, unless it can provide this level of value, it's a no. And it sort of helps limit the distraction. So I don't know whether that's a perspective that you agree with, but for me, that sort of limits the fatigue behind being bombarded with everything.
I think it always makes sense to have a framework to make your decisions, right? And I think the challenge is, of course, that I'd say 5, more likely 10 years ago, I always heard the consulting companies talk about the art of the possible, right? So let's try to explore that as kind of like an imaginative session. Today, it's like everything is possible. It's more about how to make that happen. And that's, of course, again, a very broad statement and not really a framework for selecting. So if you have, a framework that people can use to say, okay, well, whenever I have a business process or finance process that I'm running, how can I go through a logical thought process to understand, should I use technology for this? Most likely the answer is yes. And how should I do it? And what should I be using? I think that would be really useful for people because it is overwhelming. And, unless I'm sure even for you, Adam, it's overwhelming, right? You are not able to process all the new stuff that comes in either, right? Probably no one is, except maybe AI can process all the new tools itself, right? Maybe there'll be a tool on that, but it is daunting. And so if you have a framework that you feel like this is helping you to make these decisions, I'm sure others will find it useful as well.
Yeah, that's it. And from a finance perspective, I mean, you only need a few sort of key pillars. Is it going to allow me to produce better insight from my data? Is it going to free up time for my team for them to be able to do the value added stuff? But again, my minor comment there is all of the marketing, all of the sales piece focuses around those topics. So if you do see a tool and it says, win back a day a week, and I got hooked into that. I now use a tool called Motion, which Chris Riley mentioned, another colleague of mine, which is basically an auto calendar scheduler. And it's really good, right? As to whether that frees me up a day a week, there's a big question mark, right? So I'd say also have a high filter for marketing and try and add an element of realism to this sort of stuff. But either way, develop your own guiding light. Is it going to allow me to produce better insight from my data? Is it going to free up time with the team? Is it going to allow me to develop myself as an individual? So is there a learning exercise for me? And of course, there's all sorts of tech that support soft skills now and all that sort of stuff that we won't have time to go into today, right? But going back and I think I saw a post from you quite recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you produced a lot of content. And I think it sort of revolved around the subject of not necessarily AI, but sort of real-time accounting. And maybe going back to Industry 4.0, I remember there was so much buzz around, you need live data, you need to be able to make decisions instantly. But what I find is sometimes more data isn't always better. Like, if I'm trying to process, 10 newsletters at the same time, or I'm trying to, scroll through 1 billion different social feeds or whatever, I'm going to find that fatiguing, so just because I've got that information right now doesn't necessarily mean that I can use it and process it right now. So do you think we're attributing too much weight to having instant information with everything? Or do you think there is a tangible use case to being able to open a dashboard and know exactly what's going on at that particular moment in time?
Yeah. So of course, the notion of real time is, if you have real time, great. If you don't, it can of course be fine. But the thing is, real time can be expensive. Mm-hmm. And for different kind of companies, real time might not even be needed, at least not for financial data, right? If you're operating a solar park, for instance, you probably want to have real time data in terms of how's the park performing. But do you need real-time data on how much revenue that's necessarily generating? Probably not, right? So we have to be able to separate those things and say there are some things where real-time is critical to have, and others where getting a weekly update, daily update, monthly update, quarterly update could be just as fine. So I think that's the first part, being able to separate that. The second part is, more information, anything else equal, it's always good. It's always better to have more information than less information. The challenge is we need to be able to separate the signal from the noise, what's important from what's not. And that's a challenge for a lot of people. And, I always thought a bit to myself when I heard about the skill called critical thinking, that what is that really? How can you really define that? But what I've come to realize is that critical thinking is exactly that ability to be able to separate from what's important from what's not. I'll give you an example. I've probably shared this example 1,000 times in different fora and whatnot. But when I was working as a business partner, we're doing the forecasting process. We did that every quarter. And recently I had gotten a group of new stakeholders, and one of them is coming to me and he's saying, Anders, when you do your controlling of the forecast numbers, I just want you to know that there's 3,000 units but the system cannot allocate properly between import and export. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, yeah, and I don't have a big relationship with him yet. And of course, I wanted to develop that. But I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you're shipping 500,000 units every year, and we're discussing 3,000. So I'm making that conversation inside my head, and I'm telling him then straight away, it's not important. You know what? Don't worry about it. If someone gives you a hard time, send them to me. We're not going to spend time fixing this. And of course, no one came back to him. No one came to me. But the thing is, in the past, someone in finance had been controlling these numbers and saw that it wasn't 100% allocated in the system properly and wanted to fix this. And so he had been spending a lot of time with a previous business partner as well, trying to fix this. So a lot of work is going in for this senior person, together with a relatively senior finance person as well, to try and figure out some minor detail. And of course, that's just one example, but I'm sure we can all find many examples like this where we just have to let go and say, you know what? 99% is good enough today. We don't need 100%. But it's so difficult for finance people because we are brought up with, we need to be able to have things balanced. It has to match. If there's even a single, pound variance on the balance sheet between assets and liabilities, it's not good enough, right? So that's the kind of, I call it the 99% mindset we're brought up with. And in today's world, yes, there are some things that need to be 99% correct, external reporting and, the accounting stuff, fair enough. But insights for decision making, I mean, if you just have 80%, that's stellar. Sometimes you have 60%, but you have to be comfortable by saying having 60% accurate information is better used for decision making than not using it at all. Of course, if you get down to 20, 30% accuracy, you can probably start to say it's not good enough. But it's not about, do we have too much information available? No, it's about being able to separate the signal from the noise, what's important from what's not. I think it's difficult to sort of just develop that skill, that ability, but it's critical that we do that in finance.
I sometimes go back to the, can't remember whether it's 4 or 5. It's like the fact that it's the 5 whys framework. So we've identified a problem. Okay, why is it a problem? Okay, because of this. Okay, well, why? And in your scenario there, by the 5th why, you've got to the point where you're thinking, right, well, actually, it's not that much of a problem, right? And use that as a bit of a guiding light. But I guess in terms of knowing what to and what not to focus on, look for the biggest lever, I guess. And it comes back to 80/20, which we've discussed a couple of times. You've got to pick your battles and look for the areas that you're going to be able to create the most impact in. And that might not be you in isolation. It might be you in combination with who you work with, because, there's a lot to be said for sort of hive mind, groupthink, that sort of stuff. But, it's more than likely that 20% of your suppliers, you're going to be paying 80% of your money to, right? So if you're thinking in terms of negotiating with suppliers, maybe there's much more opportunity to negotiate with the suppliers that you're spending most money with than trying to haggle with every one of the smaller suppliers that you've got. Same with customers, right? We've got a target to increase our revenue. Okay, right, well, how do we find more like the 20% of customers that provide the most revenue to us? Or how can we expand our footprint within those customers? So in going through those exercises, you tend to find that you make your job easier because, as you say, you move out of that, I need to make sure that everything's got a tick box against it, which is very difficult, again, in finance where, everything has to have an answer, everything has to have, a correct answer more to the point. It can sometimes be difficult, but you are right. It is definitely a skill to be built. And I don't have a clear answer for that, because what you tend to find is that, you go into your work, you kind of go into autopilot mode, and then it's the end of the day.
I think there are many helpful frameworks here, right? I mean, you can use like Cyborg, right, where you're looking at through your value chain from your suppliers to your customers and everything that's happening in between. But I think what's really key is that you have stakeholders, and they can be finance stakeholders or they can be business stakeholders. And even if you're not in finance, you can still take this approach
Mm.
with internal customers or external customers.
Mm.
If you are understanding your stakeholder landscape, you are able to prioritize your stakeholders, and there can be different criteria to use, like, how many stars they have on their shoulders, how much they like the services they're getting from you, so different criteria, how much they trust you and so on. So you can sort of do a ranking there, and it doesn't have to be, it's not exact science, right? So it's just the back of the envelope.
Mm.
But then when you have identified your 1, 2, 3, and I wouldn't go to most important stakeholders, or we call it customers, go to them, understand what are their 3 key priorities for the next quarter, let's say, and then understand how you can help them solve these. Don't ask them, how can I help you, just as a blanket statement, because then they wouldn't know.
Mm.
So understand their 3 key priorities, and then use your skill. Here we're not talking about critical thinking. Here we're talking about finance skills, problem solving skills, a lot of other good skills, analytical skills, to help them. If you are continuously working on the 3 most important priorities of your stakeholders, you almost don't need critical thinking, because then you're doing the right thing. The challenge is we make up excuses for ourselves to be working on all sorts of other things that are not necessarily important, or we have so many things we need to do inside of finance that our customers or stakeholders, they never see us, or they see us very, very little. And if it's finance for finance work, I can tell you that it's not important, right? I mean, we need to give a base level explanation so we can explain to the market or our investors, whoever they are. But that's it. Don't overdo it. Spend time with your stakeholders. Work on their priorities. Then you're able to separate what's important from what.
Providing you agree with what your key stakeholders believe are important, and that's and I'm not saying it's a problem now, but I definitely had that issue in the past where I'd go through that exercise and I'd say, look, what do you need? And it'd be, oh, well, we need this. This is most important to me. And then there'd be something, and this is where that sort of human instinct comes in that says, I'm not sure that I agree that that's the guiding light that we should be heading towards. But I guess you've got to pick your battles, right? Because you've then got 2 options. Either you get on with it because you're not in a position to be able to either overrule or influence yet. And I think that the yet is the biggest thing, or you go through an exercise in trying to, I guess, provide a perspective that might be more useful than the previous thought process. But we've gone off on a bit of a tangent there. But yeah,
But it's just to say that all stakeholders, they have goals.
Yeah,
and those goals are typically mandated from the top, right? Because it needs to align with the strategy. So of course, if they say something that's important to them, which is not in line with their goals or their strategy, of course we should be concerned and ask some questions. But we shouldn't be asking them how we can help them, because they don't have a good idea necessarily about how a finance person can help them. So we need to understand their true priorities, and you can sometimes just look in their objectives and their KPIs and understand it from there. But we need to bring something to the table that they didn't expect, and show how we can really help them add value. But if there's no trust established yet, or we're not really able to influence, sometimes, we take a little finger, and then we really do well with that, expecting them to give more. And even if it's irrelevant, just showing our competence and skill in working on that small piece will open doors to more, right? So sometimes we would make that choice.
Yeah, 100%. And it applies, this applies to more or less anything, right? It comes down to focusing on what's important at the end of the day. But, in a tech transformation context, it's exactly the same. And what I see all the time is, people have got a way of working, so they might have a system in place, and it does these things, which is a list of 50 odd things that it does. But there's not validation to say, this is why this system helps us achieve X, Y, and Z. And most of the time when people change systems, it's not because they want to just emulate what they're doing currently quicker. It's because they actually want to get to a better place. But sometimes people miss that. So if you were to apply the same process and go to the people that, are leading the business to say, what are the objectives? What do we need to be able to measure? What do we need to be able to do? That should then inform the decision-making piece behind the technology that you adopt as well. And going back to what we said earlier about having that really high threshold for is it going to provide value or not? You can use that as the guiding light as well. So you tend to find crossovers with all of these things, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's just, and maybe we're getting to that point as well. I think we just have to remember in these transformation pieces that at the end of the day, there's a human being doing something differently, right? No matter how much technology you put in, there is still a human somewhere in the process, and that human needs to do something differently. And if we don't focus on how to make that happen, then forget about whatever tech you put in, unless it's 100% automated with no absolute human intervention, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, so I'd Chris Ortega, fresh, is it the fresh CFO or fresh FP&A? He was great. And his guiding light when he looks at transformation is people, process, platform in that order. Yeah. So people come first, obviously objectives, skill set, all of that sort of stuff. Then the process, how does their day look? How are they working? And then the platform in terms of the technology, and if you don't have the people in the process, then you really struggle to find the right platform, because you then end up in the territory of thinking that the platform is going to solve all the problems, and sometimes you can work to the process of the platform. I'm not denying that. But it doesn't take the people out of the equation. So you're dead right in that sense. And I know you've yourself gone through some projects. I know you've worked with SAP, Anaplan, and all of that sort of stuff as well. So obviously you don't have to tell us, the thought process and the implementation process or anything like that. But so people that are sort of embarking on these sorts of tech projects, is there any takeaways, any nuggets that you give, maybe something you do differently next time round to either speed things up or make sure that, do you see what I'm saying?
I think the key piece is to break it down to quite small pieces. Because obviously if you want to implement a tool or a complete new tech platform or ERP system, that's a massive undertaking. And, I often see these like S/4HANA projects, for instance, right? Where the system implementation is, well, first of all, there's a big ramp up phase where we're just talking about it and maybe involving some consultants. And then when it gets started, there's always a smaller pilot that needs to be run. And then we will start to slowly add on more pieces of the company to the platform. And that can be sometimes even 4 to 5 year process. And the problem is everyone hears about it on day one almost, but most only get the benefit in year 3, 4, or 5. So if you don't break it down into very small pieces where you can continuously show wins, improvements, great, let's say, user stories of people that are actually getting benefits out of it, people just won't care. And they will probably even work against it. It will bring down morale, and they will be like, okay, I hear you always saying that, this new platform is the solution, but I'm sitting here today with these issues and this platform is only coming in 2 years. And because it kind of stops everyone from wanting to fix things in the short term. But if you can actually show progress and show success stories, you can excite people, even they might not be first in line to get things. I think that's very important. And that's also the change management aspect, right? You need to continuously communicate progress. If you don't, people think things have died down or they're just stop believing it actually coming to them. So I think that's key for me, at least.
And that's great. And you can tell that you come from a bit of a commercial background as well, keep the carrot dangling, keep that, those incentives, front and center. And I've been thinking a lot around this recently, people attribute higher value to the things that they can have now rather than the things that they can have in the future.
Yeah.
And that's where That's it. And you see all over the internet, download this now, or implement this process in under 2 hours, all of that sort of stuff. Just comes down to psychology, I guess. So the way that you frame that, I think is excellent, but you've got to make sure that you've got an individual or a set of individuals in place who do have the bandwidth to communicate that. And that's where, again, sometimes these projects fall down is, they spend huge amount of money, on licensing, implementation, all that sort of stuff. And the assumption, and it's a fair assumption to make, is that if you've got a dedicated project manager and a project management team from the partner that is carrying out the work, that, you've got that support. You don't necessarily need to apply the same sort of thinking your side. You categorically do, because a partner doesn't know your business inside out. It's only you that knows the business and knows how to communicate that progress. So I think it's valid, coming back to the people element. If you are going to embark on a project, make sure that you've got the people that are communicating that progress effectively. Otherwise, you say people forget about it, right?
But I would add, and I think that's the leadership role. Right? So when you do big projects, whether it's a tech implementation or a huge training program, whatever it might be, the leadership team, the finance leadership team, needs to be aligned. This is an important priority, ideally a top 3 priority. Of course, if you're doing a S4HANA implementation or something else, right, then typically you have agreed that it's important, but there's probably going to be members of the leadership team that think, I'm in tax, or I'm in business finance. It's not really touching so much me. It's on accounting and the service center team, right? And then those leaders will not be communicating much, and they will just be expecting the accounting people, let's say, to communicate. And maybe the accounting people will communicate a little bit, but it's on every leader's shoulders to be part of that communication loop. Because if I'm in business finance, then what I hear most is going to be my business finance leader. If the accounting team is having a town hall, the likelihood of me showing up is not that high. So I need my leadership to communicate to me about the projects that are most important to the finance function, so that it doesn't die in silos, you can say, right? So it's a leadership role to communicate, and it doesn't just fall to the leader that is the overall project responsible person. It falls to the whole leadership team. Because if we've decided this is a top 3 priority, we should all be communicating and pushing the organization in the right direction.
And then I suppose the only difficult, you gave some examples there of, case studies, success stories of companies that have been through the same process. I describe that as making things maybe a little bit sexier, whether it's the right word or not. And I think that's the difficulty sometimes is some of these projects, they're not sexy. They I wouldn't say that they're boring, but, people attribute that, there's a lot of pain to go through before we get to that, nice, bright, shiny future that we're working towards, right? So I think,
but it could be sexy. It could be exciting. I mean, I'll give you an example, and I don't want to offend people here, but to me, at least, tax is not exciting, right? And in big companies, you have lots of entities, and for all these entities, you need to do tax filings. And so now I'm part of a scale up these days here, and I'm doing some short-term contract work there. And then I sat down with an onboarding with the head of tax, and she showed me how they had, instead of having their tax people enter in all the information into these tax forms they need to fill out every year, they had just built a robot to do this for them. And she showed me how the robot would and they probably had to do like 150 filings, right? Which would have taken ages for a person to do and completely, killed them in the process. But now the robot could, and seeing that, even I'm not in tax, that's exciting. That's sexy. Okay. Here's the robot at work. That's cool. Yeah. Now let's do some more value adding work, right? So it can be sexy, but if the robot is announced and comes 9 months later, you're kind of killing yourself in the process, right? So you need to announce the robot and then have a minimum viable product 2 weeks later. And 6 weeks later, you have a 90% product. And then you can spend 3 months, fixing out the last few details. But you need to deliver value fast in these big projects. Otherwise, you're not going to get traction.
Sexy tax bot, eh? Well,
there you go, Adam. You didn't expect that for this morning.
I didn't expect that for this morning. Next, and I think, bit of a tangent, but I remember when earlier this year, obviously everybody was talking about the potential negative connotations of technologies like AI and all of that sort of stuff. And the more I think about this sort of things, the more that I get the impression that humans are just driven by dopamine, like looking for the next hit. And I'm fine to be proven wrong. But there is some very real data to suggest that speaking to an AI or scrolling through social media feeds or whatever is a hit of dopamine, and I found that, in the middle of the night and the kids won't sleep, and I've been, speaking to ChatGPT or investigating all of these AI tools and that sort of stuff, you can definitely feel there's a pull. You want to ask the next question. You want to see what the response is. And I think that is one area that, as you've said, if you can show something that's going to give people a little bit that a hit, then it's more incentive, right? Oh, I want more of that. Yeah, let's keep on doing that. But also be mindful to not get into the rabbit hole, because you do also hear all of these, horrible stories about people allegedly falling in love with their, AI robot or whatever it happens to be. So it's all about balance, right?
Yeah, we'll see a lot of that as we're kind of. I think we're in the storming phase with AI now, right? So there's a lot of discussions and perhaps criticism and trying to figure out what are the frameworks and structures for this in the future. But we will get into the norming phase, and you will see a lot of strange things, of course, as part of that. And I think it's just natural. But I agree with you on the dopamine part, right? I mean, putting in a prompt in ChatGPT, and then here comes everything that you could have spent 4 hours trying to just think about and then write. And would you be able to do it better if you're an expert in the topic? Yes, but is better done in 10 hours? Is that a better value adding process than pretty good done in 2 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And I find it hard to justify spending 10 hours on it.
100%. The rabbit hole that I got into recently, and it was actually before I had my podcast with you, Anders, is I had a lot on. My brain was a mess. And I'd gone through a phase, a few years ago of journaling. And there was a point to this. I'd gone through a phase of journaling, and everybody always told me, you need to write down physically in a journal, because the exercise of using a pen is in some way enabling you physically to get out of your head onto paper what's going on. I've done both. So I've journaled typing and I've journaled with a pen. I think maybe there's some marginal improvements in doing with a pen in terms of clearing brain space, but not enough for me to commit to actually writing in a physical journal, because I can type quicker than I can write, and I can't read my own writing. I'm worse than a doctor when it comes to that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I was looking at this and I remembered there was an AI journal, and I was curious to see what that would look like in the AI space. So I was very nervous. Obviously, you've got a very big platform, Anders. So I was panicking. I was like, oh, imposter syndrome, all of that sort of stuff. And the platform was Mindsera, Mindsera. I've stopped using it at the moment. I don't know whether I'll continue or not. But the point is, you've got a blank canvas for you to write down what's in your mind. And then what you've got, if you choose to turn it on, is like an AI co-pilot that's then asking you questions, encourage you to go into that next level of thought process, in the same way that a therapist, it's not giving any answers, it's just asking questions. And I found that quite useful, because you get into kind of a rhythm of getting things out of your mind and going a level deeper and going a level deeper. So that was useful in itself. But then you'd also have these AI bots within the platform that would assume the personas of different people in history, past and present. So you could have a Socrates bot whereby you could ask a question, it will do that critical thinking, never ending line of questioning process. Or you could have a Marcus Aurelius bot, encouraging you to think more stoically. And all these were just bots that are pre-trained to give different perspectives. And then you've got your Elon Musk bot, you've got your Steve Jobs bot, all that are there to encourage you to make your thoughts, I guess, more constructive. But I find that incredibly fatiguing. Which bot am I going to speak to? And you get into that rabbit hole of, this is really good, because I'm getting an intelligent answer when I ask the question. It's not even a person, it's a bot. But then you hit the analyze on the summary, which combines all of your thoughts and it combines the feedback that you get from, the bot that you chat to. And it says, this is what you told, these are some potential next action. The amount of that that's useful, or let me rephrase, the amount of that I wouldn't have come to myself was very little. Do you see what I mean? So I then started thinking, have I just spent the past 2 hours chatting to an AI just to arrive at the same results that I would have done if I'd just done a simple journal and got my brain out? So that's an example of tying it back to the subject of where we just need to be careful that we're not investing a huge amount of time for something that could literally just take you 2 minutes to get out and have 80% of the results without having to overcomplicate things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. But I mean, sometimes you got to experiment, right, Adam? And now I think the insight you got from this is probably worth a lot more than maybe the tangible output from the specific process, right? So now you have that insight and say, okay, well, these tools, at least in their current state, are not worth spending their time on. And now you can tell everyone else about it, right? Which also gives some value back to you. So it's about creating that next level. You're kind of synthesizing your experiences into insights that you can share with your audience, which then for you becomes extremely valuable, right? So you might not yourself have gotten a lot of productivity out of it. The insights you gain from that at the next level, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
So you gotta see that those different levels.
And to be fair, that has also encouraged me to think more broadly about, right, well, is bot training and is feeding the bot that context something to focus on? And I've spoken about this on LinkedIn, because essentially that's all they were, your Marcus Aurelius bot or whatever. They're just an AI that's got a base prompt that says, assume you're Marcus Aurelius and respond in this way, right? It's not difficult to program a bot with a base prompt. But going back to the one thing, right? There are applications where it's useful and non-useful. So I kind of suggested, for me anyway, something that wasn't necessarily useful in terms of speaking to a bot in a journaling context. I've taken that knowledge and I kind of created a custom instruction for the one thing, because sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, right? And in the middle of the night, you can't always speak to a human being to act as a sounding board. Yeah. So I put a custom instruction in ChatGPT saying, look, using Richard Koch's 80-20 principle and the one thing methodology outlined by Gary Keller, challenge me to think differently about what I'm working on at the moment. So basically I fed it a challenge and then it would run through those and bring an output. But that was tangible, because with the infinite amount of knowledge that the AI has got, it came back with, here's how you could think differently. Of course, I had to train it to say, just don't give the obvious answer, right? Do challenge me to think differently, because otherwise you'll just get the response that you've heard a million times. But that is a useful output from, as you say, something that wasn't useful, but then has triggered maybe a more useful use case.
Yeah, no, and that's, and I always say, and this is not for technology per se, right? But you got to keep building.
Yeah.
You got to test, fail, learn, and then you build. And some things will stick and some things won't. But if you never test, fail, and learn, then you're just too comfortable doing what you're doing, and it won't last forever.
Yeah. So we're coming up to time. So we've got a couple more questions, if that's okay, Anders. So the first is, and it runs along the theme of making sure we're being hyper-focused and, sorting the wheat from the chaff, as they say. So from what you're seeing at the moment, I know we've spoken a bit about, Finance 5.0, and we've spoken a bit about tech and transformation. What do you think is one of the key things that, finance pros need to focus on at the moment? And it could be on becoming more human or, investigating tech or whatever it happens to be. But where would you encourage people to invest their time right now based on what you're seeing in the industry and that sort of stuff?
I mean, the biggest challenge for finance professionals remain that they spend way too much time working with data reporting and analysis and way too little time with their stakeholders. So, I mean, get out of the office, go spend time with your stakeholders, understand what they're doing, ask them questions, learn about their priorities, and then use your finance skills to help them because they don't have finance skills. You have finance skills, so you can bring something unique to the table. But if you look at a month and count to yourself, how many times did I actually leave my desk to go do something constructively with my main stakeholders? How much of my time was spent away versus how much time was spent sitting, doing, standard reporting and analysis and management reporting and standard slides and a bit of commentary. If you don't change that time allocation, if you don't let go of what's not important, forget about tech, forget about process improvements. It starts with yourself. It starts with your mindset that needs to change. And I think people know that. It's just really hard, but get out from the desk and out and experience the real world.
And from my perspective, again, totally agree with that. If you want to make a difference, you got to speak to people, ask questions. For me, I think, what's the best possible question that I can ask of that stakeholder? Especially if they're time poor, right? So I might have one opportunity, either face to face, Teams or whatever, to really tease out something that can help me provide value. So obviously different for every business, but I'd apply some thought, right? What is that really high quality question that I can ask that's then going to enable me to really get into the weeds of what I can support the business with? Right? Yeah. Cool. So the question I always ask, and you saw this sometimes I leave it out of the question topic so people don't pre-prepare, right? But the podcast Tech for Finance, I am a self-professed productivity, like phone app, Google Chrome extension, like nerd when it comes to that sort of stuff. So I've got 10 Google Chrome extensions on the go at any one time. And it doesn't have to be that sort of stuff. But when you look at the tech that you use, or it could even be a gadget, we had Tamer Abdal from Calls will say his favorite gadget was his one blade razor just because it works so well, right? Have you got a piece of tech, a gadget in either your personal or professional life that's your go-to that you couldn't live without?
I won't say gadget. I'd probably give a productivity hack that I think everyone should implement right away.
Yeah.
And that's your CC inbox. So any mail you get with your CC on it, you should create a rule in your email client that it goes to a CC box, because you're not supposed to do anything with it. It might be interesting for you to read and understand because you're being informed about something. You're not supposed to do anything. We all know what happens. Speaking about the dopamine earlier in the show here today, that when that ping comes up, you want to read that email. Yeah. At least I want to, right? And if there's an email, I want to read it. So whatever you can do to limit the amount of emails that are not important coming into your main inbox, the better. So the CC inbox, if you don't have it, create it now.
Amazing. Yeah. No, that's a really good shout. So it's not necessarily a tool; it's a methodology, which is equally as good. So love that. That's perfect. Okay, Anders, once again, thanks for coming on. So do you want to tell people how they can find out more about you, where they can connect with you, just so that people can connect and start a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to learn more about what we do, you can always go to bpidk.org. That's our website. And of course, you can always find me on LinkedIn. Fortunately, I'm kind of maxed out for connections, but anyone can write a message to me. Anyone can follow me. So I'm always available for dialogue there, even though people tend to say I'm kind of like a robot because I'm everywhere. But I am here, real flesh, human being. I'm not an AI bot. So you can definitely reach me on LinkedIn anytime.
Yeah. And just a note as well, Anders does a finance master sort of LinkedIn live on a semi-regular basis as well. Is it every week, every 2 weeks?
Every week on Thursdays, unless something comes in.
So there's the opportunity to stand up and contribute on that as well.
You can come on the stage and ask questions, share perspectives. Anyone is welcome there.
Yeah, so that's really good. All right, Anders. No, that's fabulous. So once again, appreciate you taking the time. hopefully we get to do this again at some point. Maybe when bots rule the world, who knows? But
Well, we don't have time by then, right?
yeah, absolutely. No, great stuff. Thanks, Anders. And yeah, catch up soon.
Thanks, Adam. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.